Man is an ant. He crawls for a moment over the face of the earth, unknown and but a number. But yet the Son of God found it worthwhile suffering that being might share the beatific vision, and gave unto mankind something unimaginable, his presence. We have got used to it. There's an old adage which is ever true: familiarity breeds contempt. The divine pedagogy discreetly warned mankind not to become familiar with what is beyond. We are up against the forces that made us. Many times God made known himself to man, the one who is, and yet cannot be pinpointed. I am what I am, or I am what I will be. Joshua lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, No, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and worshipped, and said to him, What does my Lord bid his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, Put off your shoes from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy. Holy ground. We're standing on holy ground, for the Lord is present. There is in that divine pedagogy also an education given to mankind as to how to not mingle too easily the sacred and the profane. We do not treat God as a mate, and therefore only certain chosen souls were to approach him at certain times and seasons, and every time that they did, they had to be cleansed and purified and vested in a very solemn mode, with each item being divinely given. Nothing was spared with regard to the detail. And that carries through the centuries. And we have there, at the moment of the Lord's coming, the preparation for the Incarnation, a reminder that the Incarnation, which happens at the words of consecration, when that same body again breaks through in time and space, here in our geography, that the atmosphere was very much that of encounter and fear and trembling. The Archangel Gabriel coming at a time and season where it was favourable. This burning of incense, with the people outside not holding hands, talking to each other, applauding, not catching up on the news, but on the ground in prayer. And they saw that something happened. He had had a vision. And the early church was formed in that. It did not come from the moon. We have Hebrew roots. And we took on that divine pedagogy. Vestments, consecration of persons, purification, incense, gestuality, silence, prostration, especially in the East where we came from, and worship in spirit and in truth, with not any longer the types and shadows, but the fullness, the Lamb of God upon his throne, which for us is the altar. The Spirit led the church and inspired authors, poets, musicians, monks to provide an ever richer panoply of protection for the sacred, and means of producing an atmosphere out of beauty and thereby serenity, an echo of the angels. For we have on earth what they have in heaven, but they are also with us at this point, for where the presence comes, those angels come in great numbers, together with our Blessed Lady. Some chosen souls have been shown something of what is there, dense presence awaiting the presence. How the soul must be attentive and not disperse the atmosphere by some levity, some joke, some profanity which completely crashes us down and brings us to the profane in the midst of the sacred. The priest is a mystagogue. He must lead agogein into the mystery and be an expert, therefore, at celebrating, mastering the ars celebrandi, the art of celebrating, and being an educator by his whole person and bearing, so that he doesn't draw attention to himself, but leads into a cloud of glory, the Shekinah. All the old is a preparation for the new, but has not lost its essential meaning. We can't bypass them and think that we've grown to manhood all of a sudden. At the time of that great developing of Eucharistic devotion, which led to the feast of this day, many things happened all together. In 1263, there, at the shrine of St. Christina, an early Christian martyr, a very young damsel who actually had a terrible martyrdom, this priest was celebrating, and he had doubts. What was his surprise when the Lord answered very clearly his doubts. When he saw that the host was bleeding, he didn't know what to do. But it did bleed, and we have the traces of it to this day. It fell down on the corporal and on the marble, and these have been kept. And the following year, 1264, we had the first embryonic Corpus Christi procession of history on horseback, with prelates going from Bolsena to Orvieto to a chapel prepared for these relics, still to be venerated and seen to this day. And I remember, when still a Baptist, coming across that story by chance in a very Protestant area in Llanfyllin, because there was a book of miracles in the local library. And I remember thinking to myself, if this is true, I can no longer receive Holy Communion in the Baptist Church. There had been, around that time, mystical interventions and experiences. Blessed Julian of Montcornillon, together with Blessed Eve, a recluse, had been given awareness that the Lord was moving and wanting more in the liturgical calendar. Julian herself, for a good while, did not know what this vision that she was having all the time meant. A moon, but with a streak across it. And eventually the Lord himself gave to understand the meaning, that it was the liturgical cycle of feasts, but with one great omission, a feast in honor of the greatest gift of all, his presence till the end of time. Because it was only honoured up until then in the context of the Triduum, and therefore not triumphally, but sorrowfully. And it merited joy, honour and glory in a spirit of triumph, and it led to a great floraison of Eucharistic devotion throughout Europe and eventually the world. It just happens that a person au courant of all this became Pope. He was close to this saint who had the visions, and he therefore took it on board after this next bit, which I've just described, the Bolsena event. And he wanted, therefore, a new feast, and he wanted a complete office, all of it, Mass and the Divine Office. So he brought to his palace 2 commissioned experts with their text, requested by him. One was St. Bonaventure, the Franciscan, the other was St. Thomas Aquinas, the Dominican. And St. Thomas Aquinas was invited to read his work first before the Pope, and while listening, St. Bonaventure was so moved and so touched by the beauty and perfection of the long text that without anyone knowing it, he tore up all the manuscripts that he had in his hand behind his back. No one will ever know or see what he wrote. But what St. Thomas Aquinas wrote we use every Corpus Christi and every benediction of the Blessed Sacrament to this day. It is perfect. It is perfect poetry, rhyming as well, which is rare in Latin. And it is perfectly succinct, containing the whole doctrine of the real presence. And he, one time, had doubts himself whether he'd done all he could to get things right theologically, and he pleaded with the Lord. It's rather like this child here, because St. Thomas Aquinas would go to the altar, the tabernacle, for his inspiration. And the story is that when he didn't get an answer, he would not only knock at the door, but open the door and put his head inside. So that was holy familiarity, which is not the same as our casualness. Anyway, the Lord answered him with these powerful words from heaven. Bene scripsisti de me, Thomas, you have written well of me, Thomas. You have written well of the sacrament of my body. And I remember coming across those words not long after that moment of finding that story in Llanfyllin. It was actually back in Cardiff. I walked into a Catholic church which was open in the lunch break at school, and there that was in a pamphlet, a CTS pamphlet at the back of the church. This was on the cover, Bene scripsisti de me, Thomas, you have written well of me, Thomas. And I opened it, and it gave the whole account of the way that the Lord had answered, that he'd written perfectly about the sacrament of his body and blood. So that was an answer also to my doubts. As was another pamphlet in that same rack, which I found around about the same time, about the schoolboy saint. He was about my age, actually, at the time, Dominic Savio, who had had this vision of a dark, misty field, and the Holy Father coming with a lantern and dispersing it. And the meaning was, given by the Lord, that the hierarchy was about to be established again in England. True faith was going to return. John Bosco understood it straight away, the spiritual father of the schoolboy saint. That was direct answer to my asking for clear light. Amongst the things that St. Thomas Aquinas wrote are the hymn for vigils, which is profound and theologically dense, and also the sequence at Mass itself. But just this one verse of the hymn for vigils struck me this night, and I take it up for a moment here. Sic sacrificium istud instituit, cuius officium comiti voluit, solis presbyteris, quibus sic congruit ut sumant et dent ceteris. Thus, that sacrifice he instituted, whose office he wished to be committed to priests alone, to whom it is fitting that they take it up and give to others. It was unthinkable at the time that anyone else would handle, touch, receive, and give the most precious body of the Lord to others. We've grown up, haven't we? The Lord has never ceased to make us remember what He's doing. One time He was asked by a chosen soul why He had to do all these things, why He did them, these Eucharistic miracles, and He implied by His answer that it was because of our hardness of heart, because He answered, I would prefer not to have to do these miracles. But He gave us to understand that it was because without them we wouldn't take note. And so it is that all through the centuries and right up to our time and including, we have many, many interventions, far more than we can possibly imagine. And actually it's not that surprising given the centrality of the Blessed Sacrament to our life. It is rather ironical that during the synod that was held for the Amazon, there was a strong push to have people being ordained without the proper preparation, so as to give the bread of life to these people out there. But now, the same kind of bishops who were pushing that at the time are pushing something else, which is very Protestant, which seems to take away completely from the centrality of the Blessed Sacrament and of the priesthood. In our day, the Lord shows that He's not amused when hosts fall to the ground and are treated in a very puzzling way afterwards. If they are put in water, quite often He shows His hesitation by letting that host become visible flesh and blood, or blood at least. And so we have now, because of the modern means of communication, a lot going on which we can follow if we wish. There are too many that it might be dismissed too lightly. But even on a personal level, things do happen. One becomes aware of healing happening in the context of Eucharistic blessing. That can happen, it does. Why not? It's the same Lord passing through Galilee, doing good as he went. But then, I remember when my abbey at the time here in Ireland was in trouble, and it wasn't clear what was going to happen. I mentioned to a person that things were going on in Italy. The Lord had made something strange at Civitavecchia happen. This statue of the Madonna bleeding, weeping blood, and the blood being analysed turned out to be masculine blood. So she was weeping for the abuse of the precious blood which had come through her. She feels when her son is abused. And something similar was happening in Ireland. So, with permission, we went to see where it was happening. It was in Grange Combe, down near Wicklow somewhere. And pictures were taken. One was very interesting. One could see the bloodshot eyes in the statue. And in the other, which was exactly the same picture taken again, the reason for the bloodshot eyes appeared. The host had appeared over the Immaculate Heart when she was weeping for the abuse, possibly because of sins in the priesthood. That would make sense in the context in which I was involved at the time, in the sense that our abbey, which is now closed in Ireland, had a problem. But she did not want my priesthood to be stopped by that, which was the risk. So, this was what came out. One could see very clearly the host on the Immaculate Heart, and we showed that to the lady who is now dead, who had that. She was in charge of the post office, and she immediately went back and came with this other picture, very similar, which had happened already to somebody else, exactly the same miracle, and the host completely round before it. Just a few months ago, when convalescing after being in hospital, I was in Italy, and because not far away, we went to pray at the local sanctuary, which is the place of apparition of the Madonna, Monte Berico. We happened to take a picture just in front of the sanctuary, and something similar happened there. It happened to be picked up later, that we noticed initially, but the host appeared there just in front, actually my forehead, indicating that that's where the centre should be. The centre of energy of the mind and all should be the Blessed Sacrament while here on earth. How can our life on earth, especially the consecrated life, be anything but Eucharistic? Jesus wants to be the centre of our attention and thoughts. So he wants long moments of gratuitous adoration and silence, reception and praise, reception of his word and emission of our praise, an atmosphere in which he is delighted and the angels as well. Noise is the language of hell. Beauty and stillness is that of heaven. We deflect many graces by our fidgets and our agitation, even in the realm of liturgical noise, where, far from honouring the Lord, we have found a podium for honouring ourselves, and gratification in the applause, which show full well the impurity of our motives. Praise ending up in ourselves is actually sacrilege. It was very difficult to get ordained. Many things went wrong, but it's quite curious actually what happened in the end. A letter came out of nowhere almost, and invited me to go over to Sorrentino. And even there, things were following from Ireland and so on, which were making it difficult. And then out of nowhere appeared my spiritual father, who had sent me to the Premonstrations in the first place and followed me through for years. And he heard about this problem and immediately wrote to the Archbishop. The Archbishop actually, when my prior went to him, before even reading the letter, just said, when a community is in crisis, it loses the plot. And so he had enough experience to know where the problem was and just went ahead with the ordination. But then that led coming to the moment of ordination and arranging to have first masses there with friends who had been benefactors and got me to the ordination in the first place back in Ireland. So I was sent back to Ireland to have these first masses, and therefore that meant going through Rome. To get to Rome meant going, as it happens, through Orvieto, and there I spent a night with friends, and it was a Sunday morning when I woke up there in Orvieto on the way back to Ireland, and they found a church nearby in the country where I could celebrate quietly, an old church going back to the Middle Ages, St. Bartholomew. And there, as I celebrated, I realised what had happened. That which had prompted me to think about the real presence had brought me back to the very same place, Orvieto, to have my first Mass alone, because there was no other priest concelebrating. And that's different from celebrating in the community, because when one is in community with concelebrants, the consecration doesn't depend in the same way on one, but on one's own it does. It will not happen if one is not there. And so I realised the power that one has received at the moment of priestly ordination configures one totally to the high priest, who one has no right to be, just like any man. One has a duty to be more like the angels, remembering what Cure Vaz said, that if one were to bump into an angel, it would be for the angel to kneel before the priest. So after that first Mass alone, I wrote these words, first time alone, in an old little church near Orvieto, shrine of the miracle. O Master, here at last I stand alone, with but an angel guard, and I thee call, without another voice. This silent stone, laid by another age, this heavy wall, built on the faith of centuries gone by, thought not that they this miracle would hold, that we today in freshness bid here lie, in but a sound or two of magic old. O chalice of much love, where many came neath Calvary to catch the blood of God, in silence as it fell, the same, from hand to priested hand, here where have trod the feet of many that have long gone on. The change I saw not well, yet knew 'twas done.